Welcome to my channel. Let me ask you something. How can a ship that was called unsinkable sink on its very first trip? And why, even after more than 100 years, do people still ask what really happened? The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a dream. Big, beautiful, and full of hope. But that dream ended in cold, dark water. Was it just an accident? Or is there something more? Today, we're going deep into one of the biggest mysteries in history, the story of the Titanic. Some parts will surprise you, some will make you emotional, and some will leave you with more questions than answers. So, stay with me, because the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Titanic. A dream too big? In the early 1900s, people were full of hope. The world was changing fast. Cars, planes, electricity. Everything felt new and exciting. At that time, traveling across the ocean was not easy. Ships were the only way. So when a company called White Star Line announced a brand new ship, bigger, safer, and more luxurious than any ship before, the world stopped and listened. They called it the Titanic. This ship was a dream. It was built in Belfast, Ireland, by a company named Harland and Wolff. The construction took more than 2 years. Thousands of workers worked day and night to make it perfect. The Titanic was not just big. It was the biggest ship in the world. It was about 882 feet long. That's almost 3 football fields. It had 9 decks, over 2,000 windows, and huge engines that could push it across the Atlantic Ocean. But here's where the mystery starts. People believed it could never sink. Some even said, not even God could sink this ship. It was called unsinkable. Why? Because it had something very special. Watertight compartments. These were sections under the ship that could close quickly if water got inside. Even if 4 of these filled with water, the ship was still supposed to float. But what if 5 compartments flooded? Nobody thought about that. Inside the Titanic, it was like a floating palace. First-class passengers had the best food, music, and rooms. Some rooms had golden decorations, private bathrooms, and even a gym and swimming pool. Famous people like millionaires, movie stars, and businessmen bought tickets. Even second class and third class were nicer than on most ships. For poor families, especially from Europe, it was a chance to go to America and start a new life. They sold everything just to buy a ticket. So on April 10th, 1912, the Titanic left the port of Southampton, England. People on the dock waved and cheered. Music played. The sky was clear. Everything felt right. On board were about 2,224 people. Rich, poor, young, old, and from many countries. The ship made a few short stops in France and Ireland. Then, on April 11th, it sailed into the open ocean, heading for New York. People were relaxed. They walked on the decks, drank tea, danced, and talked about their dreams. Some wrote letters home saying, "This is the best trip of my life." But something strange happened on the first day. As the Titanic left port, it passed very close to another ship called the SS City of New York. So close, in fact, that ropes broke and the ship almost crashed. It didn't. But many people felt nervous. Was it a warning? Just bad luck? Or something more? That small moment was soon forgotten. People were too excited to think about danger. The ship was fast, strong, and beautiful. Captain Edward Smith was the man in charge. He was an experienced captain with a great record. This was supposed to be his last trip before retirement. Many trusted him. Some called him the millionaire's captain because rich people liked to sail with him. But there was one quiet goal. The Titanic wanted to reach New York fast, maybe even break a record. And that might have been the first big mistake. Because speed and safety don't always go together. Still, nobody was worried. The ship was huge, the sea looked calm, and everyone believed the same thing. The Titanic was unsinkable. But what if the dream was too big? What if the ship was too proud? Some experts today say that even before it left, there were small problems. Some say the steel used in the ship was weak in cold water. Some say a fire in the engine room had started before the trip and was quietly burning behind the walls. But at the time, no one wanted to believe anything bad could happen. This was the Titanic. It was perfect. Or so they thought. As the ship moved farther into the Atlantic, the days felt quiet and smooth. But under the surface, dangers were waiting. Cold waters, icebergs, and a night that would change history. The Titanic was a dream built by humans, big, expensive, powerful. But was it too big to fail? Or was it always meant to fall? Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The Perfect Start and the Hidden Signs. After the Titanic left Ireland, it sailed into the deep waters of the North Atlantic. The sky was clear. The sea looked calm, almost like glass. Many passengers said it was the smoothest trip they had ever taken. Everyone was enjoying themselves. It felt like nothing could go wrong. In first class, people were dressed in their best clothes, eating fancy dinners, and walking along the wide decks. There was music, dancing, and laughter. In second and third class, people played games, read books, and talked about the future. Some were starting a new life in America. They believed the Titanic would take them safely to their dreams. It all looked perfect. But deep inside the ship and far across the ocean, small warnings began to appear. On April 12th and 13th, the Titanic received iceberg warnings from other ships nearby. Ships like the Caronia and Baltic sent messages saying, "Icebergs ahead." Be careful. These were called wireless messages, sent using a new invention, the radio. The Titanic had 2 radio operators who worked day and night. But here's the strange part. Many of these messages were never passed on to the captain or were sent late. Some were missed because the operators were busy sending personal messages from rich passengers instead. That's right. Warnings were coming in, and many were ignored or forgotten. Still, the Titanic kept moving fast. Some say it was going about 22 knots, almost full speed. Why the rush? Maybe to reach New York early. Maybe to show off. Or maybe just because they thought there was no real danger. Another strange thing. The ship's lookout men, the ones who watched the sea from high up in the crow's nest, didn't have binoculars. Yes, on the world's most advanced ship, the lookouts had to use just their eyes. The binoculars were locked in a cabinet, and no one had the key. Can you imagine? Sailing through icy waters at night with no binoculars? There's more. On April 14th, the weather changed. The night became very cold. Some passengers noticed the sea looked darker than usual. There was no moon, no waves. It was quiet, too quiet. But still, the Titanic moved fast. By evening, more iceberg warnings came in. One message said, "We are surrounded by ice." The captain did finally see that message. He told the officers to be careful and change the ship's direction just a little. But he did not slow down. Now we need to remember something. Icebergs are not small. They can be huge, the size of a building. But here's the trick. Most of the iceberg is under the water. Only the top part shows. And at night, in calm water, they are very hard to see. No waves splash against them. They are silent. It was like driving a car at night, without headlights, and still going full speed. The officers on the ship also gave no special orders that night. No extra watchmen, no full alert. People were sleeping, talking, playing cards. The band was playing music. Everything felt normal. But the ocean was hiding something. That night, around 9:30 p.m., one ship, the Mesaba, sent a strong warning. Heavy pack ice and large icebergs right ahead. But the radio operator on the Titanic was busy. He was trying to fix a message for a passenger. He never passed the message to the bridge. He didn't think it was urgent. Another warning lost. At around 10:55 p.m., another ship, the Californian, stopped because of heavy ice. The radio operator there tried to contact the Titanic. He warned them, "We are surrounded by ice." We have stopped. But the Titanic's radio man, tired and stressed, told him to be quiet. He said, "Shut up. I am busy." A few minutes later, the Californian's radio went off. No one was listening anymore. And so the Titanic sailed alone, into the ice, into the night. This chapter is full of questions. Why didn't they slow down? Why didn't they listen? Why didn't they give the lookouts binoculars? Was it pride? Was it pressure? Or was it just a chain of bad choices? No one knows for sure, but the signs were there, the warnings came, and one by one, they were missed. At 11:40 p.m., the lookouts finally saw something. A dark shape, a white shadow, growing bigger, quickly. And in the next chapter, we will talk about what happened in that moment, when the Titanic met the iceberg. Chapter 3. The Night It Happened. A silent killer in the dark. It was the night of April 14th, 1912. The Titanic moved quietly through the cold, dark sea. Most people were asleep in their cabins. Some were still playing cards or listening to music. The sea was strangely calm. The sky was clear. There was no moon, only stars. It was peaceful, too peaceful. But then, at 11:40 p.m., everything changed. From the crow's nest, high above the ship, two lookouts saw something in the distance, a large dark shape. At first it looked like a shadow. Then it became clear. It was an iceberg, and it was directly in front of them. One lookout rang the warning bell 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and said just 4 words. "Iceberg right ahead." Down on the bridge, First Officer Murdoch reacted fast. He ordered the ship to turn hard to the left. At the same time, he told the engines to stop, then go full reverse. But the Titanic was huge and heavy. It could not turn quickly. For a few seconds, it seemed like they might miss the iceberg. But they didn't. The iceberg hit the right side of the ship. Not in one place, but in a long, slow scratch. The iceberg tore open 5 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments. Remember, the Titanic could stay afloat if 4 compartments were damaged. But now there were 5. Water rushed in. At first, many passengers didn't even feel it. The hit was not loud. It was soft, like a hand brushing against metal. Some people said it felt like a small bump. Others thought it was just a strange noise. But down below, in the lower decks, the truth was clear. The ship was in trouble. Water was coming in fast. Within minutes, the captain and engineers checked the damage. They knew the terrible truth. The Titanic was going to sink. It was no longer unsinkable. It was going down. But how long would it stay afloat? Maybe an hour? Maybe 2? They had to act fast. Captain Edward Smith gave the order. Prepare the lifeboats. But here came another shock. The Titanic only had 20 lifeboats. That was enough for about 1,178 people. But there were over 2,200 people on board. Why so few boats? Because back then, the law didn't require more. Ships were judged by size, not number of people. And the Titanic looked safe enough to sail without many boats. Some even said too many lifeboats would make the deck look messy. Now, those decisions became deadly. At 12 o'clock midnight, the crew began waking people up. Many passengers were confused. They were told to dress warmly and go up to the deck, just to be safe. Most didn't understand how serious it was. Some refused to leave their warm rooms. Others went back to sleep. The ship still looked strong. There was no panic yet. But below deck, water was flooding the ship fast. Soon the band began playing music to keep people calm. The officers asked women and children to get into the lifeboats first. But here's something heartbreaking. Many boats were launched only half full. People didn't want to get in. They thought it was safer to stay on the big ship. One lifeboat that could hold 65 people left with only 28. Some passengers thought this was just a small delay. Others were scared to leave their loved ones behind. Men were not allowed to board unless there were empty seats. Husbands kissed their wives. Fathers said goodbye to their children. The sadness was growing. At around 1:20 a.m., the front of the Titanic was deep in the water. The back of the ship was slowly rising. The lights were still on, but flickering. People began to realize the truth. This ship was sinking. Now the panic began. Some passengers jumped into the freezing water. It was about -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so cold that most people could survive only 15 to 30 minutes. The lifeboats were rowing away, but many people were left behind on the ship. Over 1,500 people were still on board, with no way out. At 2:18 a.m., the Titanic's front was completely underwater. The back stood high in the air. Then came a loud sound. The ship broke in two. The front sank first. The back stayed up for a few seconds, and then followed it down. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone. In just 2 hours and 40 minutes after hitting the iceberg, the unsinkable ship had disappeared into the Black Ocean. The screams in the water were heard from far away. People in lifeboats looked back, helpless. Some boats returned to help. Most did not. They were too afraid. One boat, led by a woman named Margaret Brown, later known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, helped pull people from the water. But for most, it was too late. Out of over 2,200 people on board, more than 1,500 died that night. Only 705 survived. That night was full of mistakes, fear, and missed chances. But the question now was, why did this really happen? Could the disaster have been stopped? Could more people have survived? In the next chapter, we'll talk about the sad truth. The many mistakes that led to so many lives being lost. Chapter 4. So many lives lost. But why so many mistakes? When the sun rose on the morning of April 15th, 1912, the Titanic was gone. What was once the largest and most beautiful ship in the world now lay broken on the ocean floor. The sea was calm, but it was full of silence and sadness. More than 1,500 people had lost their lives in just one night. But here's the hardest part to accept. Many of those lives could have been saved. Let's talk about why. The Titanic had over 2,200 people on board. Only 705 survived. That means about 2/3 of the people on that ship died. Not because there were no warnings, not because the iceberg was too big, but because of human mistakes. Things that could have been done better. One of the biggest problems was the number of lifeboats. The Titanic only carried 20 lifeboats, even though it had room for more. These boats could only carry about 1,178 people. And even then, they were not used properly. Some lifeboats went into the water with only a few passengers inside. Boat number. One had room for 40 people, but it left with just 12. Why? Because many passengers didn't believe the ship was really sinking. Some were afraid of the small boats. Others were told to stay back. And here's something even more heartbreaking. Class mattered. First-class passengers had better access to the upper decks. They were helped first. They got to the lifeboats faster. Second-class passengers were not far behind. But for third class, or steerage, the situation was worse. Many of them were locked behind gates or in the lower parts of the ship. Some didn't speak English. Some didn't even know where to go. There were families with children who were never given a chance to escape. Later, it was found that most of the people who died were from third class. Now let's talk about the crew. Many of the ship's workers tried their best. Some helped people into boats. Some stayed until the very end. But there was also confusion. The crew had never done a real lifeboat drill with passengers. Some didn't know how many people each boat could carry. Some were afraid the boats would break if they were too full. So, instead of filling the boats, They sent them off half empty. Captain Edward Smith, who had over 40 years of experience, was calm, but maybe too calm. Some say he didn't act quickly enough. Others say he was trying to avoid panic. He went down with the ship, like many captains of that time. But people still ask, could he have done more? Another mistake was the speed of the Titanic. Experts still argue about this. The ship was going close to 22 knots, almost full speed, even though there were at least 6 iceberg warnings that day. Many believe the ship should have slowed down, especially at night. But the company wanted a fast trip. There were whispers that they wanted to arrive in New York earlier than planned, to impress the world. And then there's the story of the Californian, a ship that was just 10 to 20 miles away from the Titanic that night. Its radio operator had gone to sleep just minutes before the Titanic hit the iceberg. The ship saw strange lights and even flares from far away, but they didn't understand what they meant. They thought it was a celebration. So they did. Nothing. They did not respond. They did not help. Many believe that if the Californian had come, hundreds more could have survived. So many small decisions. So many chances to stop the disaster. And so many of them were missed. And yet, in the middle of this tragedy, there were also moments of bravery. The ship's band kept playing music until the very end to keep people calm. Some men gave up their seats so women and children could survive. A few lifeboats turned back to help others in the water. One woman, Molly Brown, later called the unsinkable Molly Brown, helped people row her lifeboat and demanded they return to help more. These stories remind us that even in the darkest night, there is light. After the disaster, the world was shocked. People in America and Europe cried and demanded answers. How could this happen? How could the unsinkable ship sink so fast? There were investigations. In the US and in the UK, new laws were created. Ships were now required to have enough lifeboats for everyone. Radio operators had to work 24 hours. Ice patrols were sent to watch the sea and give clear warnings. But for many, it was too late. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of hope, pride, and human progress. But in one cold night, it became a symbol of loss, failure, and tragedy. And for some people, the story still doesn't make sense. In the next chapter, we'll look at something different. Not facts, but theories. Was the Titanic disaster just bad luck? Or was there something more? Strange decisions, powerful people, and secrets that have never been fully explained. Some believe the Titanic story is still hiding something. Chapter 5. Conspiracies and Secrets. What are they hiding? Until now, we've talked about what happened to the Titanic. The building, the iceberg, the sinking, and the many mistakes that cost lives. But even after all the facts, many people still feel like something doesn't add up. There are questions that have never been fully answered. There are stories that sound strange, too strange to ignore. This is the part of the story where mystery takes over. Let's start with one of the most famous theories, the Olympic switch theory. The White Star Line, the company that owned Titanic, had another ship called the RMS Olympic. It was almost exactly the same size and shape as the Titanic. In fact, the two ships looked like twins. But before the Titanic was finished, the Olympic had an accident. It crashed into another ship and was badly damaged. Some people believe the company was in big financial trouble because of the damage. Repairs were expensive. The Olympic was no longer perfect. So what's the theory? Some say the company secretly switched the two ships. They say the ship that sailed as the Titanic was actually the Olympic, already damaged, already a loss. The idea is that the White Star Line sent it out on one last trip, knowing it might sink. If it did, they could collect a huge amount of insurance money. In other words, it was no accident. It was planned. This theory is shocking. But is it true? Most experts say no. There's not enough proof. But still, some small details make people wonder. Some survivors said things on the ship didn't match the Titanic's plans. The word Titanic looked freshly painted in places. And some workers refused to sail, saying they felt something was wrong. Now let's talk about a name you might know. J.P. Morgan. He was one of the richest men in the world, and he owned the company that owned the Titanic. He had his own private suite on the ship, with a large bathtub and all the luxury he needed. But just before the ship sailed, J.P. Morgan suddenly canceled his trip. He said he was sick, but later people saw him healthy and shopping in France. Why did he really stay off the ship? It gets stranger. 3 of J.P. Morgan's business rivals, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor IV, all boarded the Titanic, and all 3 died in the sinking. These men were wealthy, powerful, and said to be against some of J.P. Morgan's ideas, especially the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve, a system that controls America's money. The Titanic sank in April 1912. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Was it just a coincidence? Some say no. They believe the Titanic was used to remove people who were in the way. But again, there's no solid proof. Only questions. Now let's talk about a book. A book written 14 years before the Titanic sank. It was called Futility, also known as The Wreck of the Titan. It was written by a man named Morgan Robertson in 1898. In the book, a ship called the Titan crashes into an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship is also called unsinkable, and it doesn't have enough lifeboats. Many people die. The story sounds almost exactly like the Titanic disaster, but it was written before it ever happened. How is that possible? Some say it was just a wild coincidence. Others believe the writer knew something. Or maybe some parts of history are planned long before they happen. There's more. Some people believe the Titanic was doomed from the start. They say there was a fire in the engine room before the ship left Southampton. A real fire. Some photos from that time show dark marks on the side of the ship. These could be signs of heat and damage. The fire may have weakened the metal, making the ship more likely to break when it hit the iceberg. But the company still sent the ship out. Why? Maybe they didn't think it was serious, or maybe they didn't want to cancel such an expensive trip. And what about the Californian? The ship that was nearby but didn't help? Some people believe it was part of a larger plan, that it was supposed to rescue passengers after a quiet, planned evacuation. But something went wrong. The iceberg came too fast. The damage was worse than expected. And the plan, if there was one, fell apart. Again, no one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was full of rich and powerful people. Important people. And its sinking changed history. Whether you believe the conspiracy theories or not, they raise big questions. Why were so many warnings ignored? Why did the ship sail so fast? Why were some lifeboats half empty? Why did the nearby ship do nothing? Why did some powerful men cancel their trip? Just in time. There's one final part of the story. What happened after the Titanic sank? In the next and final chapter, we'll talk about the discovery of the wreck, the deep ocean secrets, and how the Titanic still teaches us and haunts us more than 100 years later. Stay with me. We're almost at the end. Chapter 6. The Titanic Today. Still lying in the deep. The Titanic sank in the early morning hours of April 15, 1912. The world was shocked. The biggest, most advanced ship had vanished beneath the sea, taking more than 1,500 people with it. Families waited at docks, looking for faces that would never return. Newspapers around the world printed one word over and over again: tragedy. But the Titanic didn't disappear completely. It stayed in people's minds, in books, films, songs, and memories. Survivors told their stories. Some couldn't sleep at night. Some never spoke about it again. And the rest of the world kept asking, what really happened out there? For more than 70 years, no one could even find the ship. The Titanic had sunk so deep, more than 12,000 feet down, that no person or machine could reach it. The Atlantic Ocean kept the secret. People guessed where it might be, but every search failed. Then, in 1985, something incredible happened. A man named Dr. Robert Ballard, an oceanographer, found the wreck of the Titanic. He used special underwater robots with cameras to explore the deep sea. And finally, after decades of silence, the world saw it again. The broken body of the Titanic, resting in darkness. What they found was emotional. The ship was in two pieces, the front and the back, lying about 1,970 feet apart. Everything was frozen in time. Plates were still stacked. Shoes were still sitting on the ocean floor. Personal items like glasses, combs, and letters were all there, slowly fading away. The ocean had become a graveyard. But even after all these years, the Titanic still has secrets. Since its discovery, scientists and explorers have returned many times. They've brought up thousands of artifacts, jewelry, furniture, letters, and even parts of the ship. Some of these items are now in museums. People travel from around the world to see them. Why? Because the Titanic is not just a ship. It's a symbol. It reminds us of how strong and how weak we humans can be. Technology is powerful, but nature is stronger. Pride can build great things, but one mistake can break everything. The Titanic was supposed to be perfect, but it showed us that nothing and no one is truly untouchable. Today, the Titanic is slowly disappearing. The deep ocean is eating away at the metal. A type of bacteria is turning the ship into rust. Scientists say that in 30 to 40 years, the Titanic may be completely gone. Only pieces will remain. And memories. Some people believe we should leave the ship alone, that it is a resting place, and we should respect it. Others think we must keep learning from it, to teach new generations what happened and why. In both ways, the Titanic still speaks to us. And now, more than 100 years later, we are still fascinated. There have been films, like James Cameron's Titanic in 1997, one of the most watched movies in history. There have been books, games, exhibits, and even deep-sea tours. People want to feel connected to that night, to that story, to those people. Maybe that's because the Titanic is not just about a ship sinking. It's about human stories. It's about a woman who gave up her lifeboat seat for her maid, a musician who kept playing while the ship went down, a man who kissed his wife goodbye and said, "You jump, I jump." It's about fear, love, courage, and loss. And that's why the Titanic mystery still lives on. Even today, people ask questions. Did someone plan it? Was it an accident? Could it have been stopped? We may never know the full truth, but we can learn from it. We can be more careful, more thoughtful, more kind. We can make sure that such mistakes never happen again. The Titanic is still lying in the deep, quiet, cold, and alone. But its story will never sink.